Awesome.
Yeah. All right. As promised, folks, I am here with Christopher Hicks, and it is definitely going to be an interesting one. Chris was deep in the music industry as a drummer, toured with Sublime, and there is a point in this story where the temptation, the whispering, the voice from the devil comes, soliciting him to make a pact with the devil. But before we get to that, huge thank you to Chris for coming on. Thank you, viewers, for tuning in. Now, Chris is going to take us through his journey slowly and chronologically, so we can understand exactly what's happened. While you post your questions in the chat, I will star them and store them, and then once he's finished telling his story, we will put those questions to him. So again, Chris, thanks for coming on. How did all this start for you, my friend?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's just a blessing to be able to give testimony and just to explain all the things that had happened, accumulated to the point of really, my experience with the devil, and then later my experience with God. So I just want to say thank you before I get started.
Yeah, and Chris's links are in the description box below this video, so please support his work. So when you was a kid, did you ever have that conversation, when I grow up, I want to be an astronaut, I'm going to be a policeman, that kind of thing? Did you ever have any goals like that?
I mean, yeah, I guess it was like a normal kind of kid thing. It's like very standard. It seems like a kid wants to be a fireman, or, like especially, guys, they want to be like a fireman. They want to be president of the United States. And, I always definitely had a desire to become a musician. My father was a musician. He worked at KQRS, 92 KQRS in Minneapolis. He worked as a disc jockey. So he was a guitarist. He was a disc jockey. He also did kung fu. So I very, fell into the cadence of my father and what my father was doing, my real father. However, I lived with my mother and my stepfather in the state of Wyoming, and he had gotten into a very, very severe car accident and, left some, I believe, some like kind of brain trauma. And that's when I noticed the change kind of started happening within him. And he was a severe alcoholic. He was drinking all the time. He, at that point, he ended up becoming very, very abusive. I mean, to a very, very bad degree. And funny enough, like I just talked to my real father a couple of days ago, and I was always under the impression that I was court ordered by the state of Wyoming to leave Douglas, Wyoming, and to go move in with my real father. But actually, that wasn't the case. My real dad told me just recently, and I didn't know about this, that he fought for me. So he got a lawyer during Christmas time. He actually found a Jewish man that was, not celebrating Christmas, obviously. So he got him as a lawyer, ended up figuring everything out. And that's when I actually made the transition. I had no idea about that until a couple of days ago after giving my testimony on another program. So, but yeah, the abuse was very, very bad. I lived in perpetual fear when I was living with that stepfather. I was always afraid to go home. I was afraid to do anything wrong. So I remember leaving my bike at my friend's, and I totally forgot to bring my bike home. And I was so scared to tell my stepfather. So I tried to keep it hush, and he ended up finding out. And he made it like a public display of me, like he ended up like using a belt out in the open, like in front of, the whole neighborhood. So it's just like a lot of shame that was attached to this experience. And I always had this thing that I needed to prove myself after that point. Like I was going to prove myself that I'm worthy of people's attention. I'm worthy of people, that I'm not going to be made a mockery, basically, So what had happened is around Christmas time, and my stepfather had went to a work party with my mother, and I'm not sure exactly what had happened when they got back, but I believe that they were fighting, and my mom ended up taking off to, I believe, her work Christmas party. So I was left at home with my stepfather and my two other sisters. And so when this happened, he came into my room. He was very, very drunk, and he starts abusing me, and he starts punching me and doing all these things. And he's saying, you know, why don't you block, you know? And he was like, you know, Kung Fu, you think, you know, Kung Fu, why don't you block yourself? So I'm trying to block, you know, like these punches. And obviously as a young child, I'm not able to block, you know, punches from a grown man, especially, you know, a very, very, he was relatively, you know, bigger guy, but he was also very inebriated. And there was just, I mean, he was just laying it on me. You know, it wasn't like any kind of soft punches. There was a couple of times where he actually picked me up and he threw me across the room. And I remember hitting the wall behind me and just sliding down. And I had my eyes closed. So I didn't even know, like when I was flying through the air, I didn't know which direction I was even going. And when I would open my eyes, I was surprised that I was literally on the way on the other side of the room. So I ended up getting the worst beating of my life. That was the worst one that I had in the past. I had a black eye, bloody lip, bruises everywhere. And I remember the next day that my house, you know, my mother's house and stepfather's house was crawling with cops. They're taking photos of me, you know, like, and just it was so much shame because I had to take off my shirt and I had, you know, it was Christmas and it just wasn't the Christmas that I thought it was going to be. So I ended up flying over to New Brighton. Well, it was Minneapolis, Minnesota. Went to New Brighton, Minnesota, where my grandmother is. And we were celebrating Christmas. My father had seen me and he was just like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe what had happened. He even told me recently that he asked me who did this, you know, because my recollection, excuse me, my memory on the situation was very, very bad. It wasn't that good because I was so young and just, it was a lot of trauma involved. So he had asked me, you know, he's like, who did this to you? And I was like, it was my stepfather. So he took the initiative and that's when I ended up moving to New Brighton, Minnesota to live with my real father. And at that time, you know, he was playing guitar all the time. He was playing shows. He was doing these, he would take me to his work. And I remember answering the phones at KQRS 92, you know, for like song requests. And I'm like this, you know, about 9 years old at that time, taking song requests for people that are calling in. So, I mean, it was cool. Like I went from trauma to one of the most loving men I've ever met in my life. My dad is a great, great man, very talented at the guitar, loves music. I mean, he just oozes with talent. So it just kind of, I just fell into that. But I still had this shame. I had this desire to be recognized and to prove myself to people. So you know, any normal kid at that time, I mean, I'm sure, I believe a lot of kids, you know, they want to play drums, you know, and I always loved drums. The first time I played drums was about 9 years old, right when I moved there, and I was playing my dad's drummer's kit, and I just, you know, played for about 2 hours straight, and I was like, this is what I want to do when I grow up. So that was actually, you know, at that time, that's where it solidified. I wanted to be a drummer. My dad bought me a kit, learned on my own. I didn't really take any classes or anything like that. He taught me the very basic beat at that moment. And I just kind of went to town, would listen to different music. Back then, I don't know, even if your viewers have even heard of Sunny Day Real Estate. That was my favorite band when I was around 14, 15 years old. They were like out of the Seattle grunge movement. So I was like trying to, you know, play exactly what that drummer was. Unbelievable, phenomenal drummer. Yeah, but anyways, ended up becoming relatively good at that age. Joined my first band called Charlie Brown's Cousin, and we were doing local stuff. At that time, we had moved down to Rochester, Minnesota, so we were playing in Rochester, Minnesota. Mainly, you know, that was like my high school years. Felt like I needed to really expand myself, and I couldn't do that living in Rochester. So I ended up moving to Minneapolis, Minnesota. And at that time, my best friend, he had already moved up there. So he had this place that he was hanging out at all the time called the Playhouse. And so, you know, my best friend's going there. I was like, yeah, I'm going to go check it out. And so I went there ended up becoming the main drummer for the Playhouse. I guess you could say there was a lot of studio musicians that had lived there. There was a band called Wookiefoot that actually lived there before me, and it was at that time called the Wookiefoot House. And after they moved out, then we took over and ended up being the Playhouse. So there was crazy things happening at this place because very, very talented Minneapolis musicians that were there. One of the people that actually came out of that place was a gentleman called Matthew Miller, who later became Matisyahu. So I don't know if anybody has heard of Matisyahu, but he actually came out of the Playhouse originally. He was from New York, I believe White Plains, New York. He moved to the Playhouse, lived there for a little bit, but he was traveling all the time. He's doing all these things, but we actually lost contact of Matthew Miller. And it was a couple years, I would say 2 or 3 years later, he ends up calling this guy, Jojo, who was in the band Wookiefoot, and said, he's like, hey, watch, I believe it was Craig Kilborn. He's like, watch Craig Kilborn. He was like, watch it. And we're like, you don't talk to us for like 2.5 years. You just tell us to, watch this show. He was like, just do it. So we end up watching it. And there he is as a Hasidic Jew, Matisyahu, and he's performing reggae on the show. It was crazy. So I actually ended up playing. This was my former band before John Wayne and the Pain, but I was in this band called Adjoining Separatists, and we actually opened up for Matisyahu at a place called the Caboose in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where Matisyahu actually got signed to Sony Records, and then he really blew up after that point. I mean, it's kind of, you don't see a Hasidic Jew doing reggae, it's just like, I don't know, but he was incredible. And it was around this time that like, this was kind of instilling in me, like religion and God. And I just started kind of questioning things. So at this time I was writing a screenplay, and the screenplay was about one subject, but I kept on recalling this photo that I had seen when I was a child. My dad actually had shown this photo to me, and it was a mutual friend of him and I, and it was actually my kung fu teacher and his kung fu teacher. But his mother went overseas to there was a sighting of the Virgin Mary holding baby Jesus in Egypt, and she had taken a photo inside this church. I can't remember. I believe it was a Coptic church. I could be wrong. It might be Catholic. But anyways, there had been a lot of sightings of the Virgin Mary at this church. And so she took a photo of this church. And when she got it developed back in the United States, an apparition of a woman presenting a child. And it was like the most beautiful looking woman I've ever seen. Like, I mean, very just soft, like features. You could tell there's just like a lot of love in her eyes, but she was presenting this child. And I knew immediately, my dad didn't even have to tell me what it was, but I knew that it was Virgin Mary holding baby Jesus. So that picture started coming back to my memory all the time, like just like over and over and over. And I felt like a very huge need and desire to, write a screenplay about a prophet. So I started studying the different religions. And I was going from, one religion, Sikhism, to Buddhism, the Muslim religion, all these things, Christianity. And I was just studying and just kind of trying to see what the differences, what the similarities are, and all these different things. So during this time too, I had around this time, like I started joining another group, and it was called John Wayne and the Pain. John Wayne, phenomenal singer. Like he has an amazing voice. And we started making some traction at that time, and I was making quite a bit of money, actually more money than I was making at a hospital that I worked in, Salida, Colorado. So doing really, really well in the music industry, recording at major studios. One of the studios that I recorded at was Pachyderm Studios, which Nirvana recorded their, I believe it was their In Utero album. So it was their last album before Kurt Cobain ended up, dying. So anyways, just making a lot of traction in the music scene. I was living the high life, but I had this crazy emptiness inside. And it was an emptiness in the sense of there was a void in my heart. I was at the end of myself, and I was about to, you know, commit the S word basically, and I was gonna just end myself. I was in the playhouse in this huge mansion that we had, full studio, bar. We had a production studio up in the upstairs. We also had a slide that went down from the second floor to the kitchen. I mean, it was a crazy home. All the walls were painted, all trippy, and all these different colors and stuff. So it wasn't a normal mansion, but it was a playhouse. Anything that you would think of, like we just basically partied there all the time and recorded music. So I'm in the room, and I remember just praying, and I was weeping, and there was a full moon cast into the window. Like, it was just perfectly aligned right in the middle. And I was just remember thinking, I was like, God, if you exist, you need to show yourself to me. Is it through Buddha? Is it through Muhammad, Mary, Jesus? Who is it? And sure enough, I ended up actually having an experience about, I don't remember how long exactly it was after that point, but it was, I would say, like a week or two within, that time. But I was in Rochester, Minnesota with my ex-fiance, and we were laying down in her parents' basement. We had slept over at her parents' house. We're laying in front of this fireplace, and I woke up around 3 a.m., 3 a.m.-ish, and I was shaking so, like, profusely, and I was drenched in sweat. Like, there was such a fear that had happened, and whatever had happened in my sleep, there was a dream, and I knew it took place in the desert. That's all I knew, but I knew there was just this fear that was just coming upon my body. I've never experienced anything like that in my life at that point. And I remember I had this, like, these keys, and for whatever, well, I had like a little flashlight thing on there, and I ended up going to the bathroom. I was shaking so much that I even dropped those on the ground. I come back, and I lay back down, and my fiance, she's sleeping throughout this whole situation. And I'm looking at the fireplace, and there hadn't been a fire for a good 3, 4, 5 hours or something like that. And all of a sudden, a little flame rekindled and popped up, and I felt this peace. It just came upon my body, and it completely calmed my body. I've never felt anything like that. It was a peace that surpasses all understanding, and my body completely got calm. And I was able to go to sleep at that point. But I also knew that there was something greater than me, something that I've never experienced before in my life. And I knew God existed at that point, but I just didn't know who through. So I wake up, and I'm trying to tell, thinking that people are going to understand this, and I'm trying to tell my girlfriend, my ex fiance's parents at that time what had happened, and they're looking at me like, okay, yeah, sure, like this guy's nuts, and they're Christian, but they just don't believe in the supernatural. So they're very just how do I put it, religious Christians. I don't want to say religious because some people get offended by that, but the sense they don't believe that God does miracles. You know what I mean? So I was like, okay. I mean, I knew what I experienced, and I knew it was real. So a few days later, I would say, excuse me, it was like 3 days later, I was working at a coffee shop, and I had a part-time job at a coffee shop called Passport Coffee, which is no longer there in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I'm sure your viewers, I don't know, maybe some of them have been to Minneapolis, but Minneapolis has a whole bunch of skyway systems where you can walk inside from one building to the next. And it gets very, very cold in Minnesota. Obviously, it's just horribly cold. So they just, made that like a skyway system so you can walk from one building to another. So it was an open face coffee shop facing out. And this guy walks in, and let me back up real quick, because I'd been crying about a half hour earlier, because this is right when a lot of like natural disasters were starting to pick up, happening on the East Coast, earthquakes, hurricanes, and all these things. And it just, to me, it didn't seem like natural. I don't remember hearing all these natural disasters happening all the time. And I was like, I felt such a compassion for people that had to go through this devastation and, losing their home and losing family members. Like this deep compassion hit me. And then this gentleman walks in front of the coffee shop, he points inside and he said, "There you are. I've been looking for you." And it was this pastor that I hadn't seen for, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years, something like that. But it was back in my Rochester days, which was about an hour and a half from Minneapolis. And I was like, oh my gosh, I was like, you're the perfect person that I need to talk to. His name is Grover. So I told Grover what had happened. And he looked at me and he said, "That was from the Lord Jesus Christ, and you're going to have another experience." Well, sure enough, 7 days after that first experience, I had my full encounter with Jesus. And it was my buddy Shaun and I were in the desert inside this vehicle, and this was a dream. And we're going through the desert, and we're heading towards this black thunderstorm, and it's raining, it's lightning, and we're trying to see what was on the other side of this darkness. We're like, let's see what's on this other side of this darkness. And we're getting stuck in the mud, and we're in this vehicle, and it's just like so frustrating. And out of frustration, I remember like even outside we're trying to get the car like unstuck. And it was just like, why are we doing this? Like, what's the point of this? So we end up turning back around. And when we turn back around, I see thousands of white doves flying in the sky. And I'm like, that is crazy. I've never seen anything like that. And all of a sudden they started taking formation, perfect synchronicity, like boom, 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 boom. And I said, "Shaun, we're stopping the car. Something big is happening." So we get out of the car, and they had formed a cross, and it took from one end of the sky all the way to the other. But now it had turned into a cloud. So it was a cross, like a cloud cross that took, it was encompassing the whole sky, but it was simple. It was a plain and simple cross. And now there was another cross present to the left, to the right, that were kind of different shape. I would almost have to say, so that if you're looking up to it, the cross on the left had almost like a Celtic kind of style, I guess you would say. It's hard to explain, but it was different. It wasn't plain and simple. And the one to the right was different, but I couldn't really see it all that well. So I don't know exactly what it looked like, right? So I'm looking up at the middle cross, and all of a sudden, I just felt this love, and I couldn't even take my eyes off it because it was so much love, and it was just, I had this like perfect peace and this warmth that was encompassing my body, and then I was raptured up into it. I was taken up to it. I ended up merging with the cross. And it felt like millions upon millions of volts of electricity just coursing through my body. And the best way that I can explain it was that my body exploded, but it didn't hurt. Or like millions upon millions of electricity, and it didn't hurt. That's the only way that I could possibly explain this. So, and while I was merged with this cross, I also saw like visions of the guys that actually bound the cross together. And I remember them stretching and pulling the rope to tighten it. And I felt it. Like I could feel the tightening of the rope. And I also felt the blood of Jesus pour out onto the cross. And that it had so much power. It was crazy. And instantly I am down at the desert ground, and the cross to my left, if you're looking up at it, the cross to the left, the cross to the right of Jesus starts blinking. The one that's kind of like a Celtic, that style cross was blinking in all these dazzling colors. I mean, beautiful colors. It was just mesmerizing, but it didn't have anything, no love, nothing. And it left me in this trance. It was literally lifeless. And so I get out of this trance, and I see a bird come swooping down towards me. And there were still white doves flying around only the middle cross. But this one came swooping down towards me, and I had all this pride and thought it was like the greatest thing ever, even though I was depressed, right? It's like, I'm depressed. My life is horrible, but I have all this pride at the same time. I don't know how that works, but I guess it does. So anyways, the bird comes swooping down towards me, was the only pigeon, and the voice of God spoke, and he said, "Believe." And when he said believe, it was like an earthquake. It created an earthquake because it had so much power, but it had like kind kind of like a waterfall, like the rumbling of a waterfall. It had so much power to it, yet at the same time, gentleness. And it's so hard to explain unless you have actually experienced it. So it was like, believe, but it was just gentle at the same time. And when he said believe, I was unable to stand in the presence of God. I was unable to, in the Bible, it says that every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus is Lord. That's what had happened to me. And I had to go down to my knees. And I held up my hands, and the bird that came down, the pigeon, starts attacking my hands, and I'm trying to get away and get away. And instantly I appear in this village in the desert, and I'm talking to my best friend at the time. And I'm like, Drew, I was like, you got to believe Jesus is real. Jesus is real. And he's like, whatever, Chris. He's like, I don't believe. And he turned his back. And I remember feeling so much pain and hurt that even my best friend wouldn't believe. I wake up drenched in sweat, shaking, and completely transformed at that point. I knew God existed. Depression was gone. All these things, my desires of, not necessarily of that lifestyle, because I still wanted to play drums, but I was a changed person, definitely at that point, 100%. And real quick to back up as well, that same best friend that was in the dream, at the end of the dream, I was on the stoop of the playhouse one evening, and he was kind of sitting back behind me. And